The lone human in the Council of Titans. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council stood as a testament to 10,000 years of interstellar diplomacy. Towering pillars of obsidian and gold reached high into the domed ceiling, where a vast expanse of crystalline panels refracted the light of 3 distant suns. The air shimmered with energy fields designed to accommodate the diverse atmospheres of the hundreds of species present. Inside, thousands of alien representatives filled the chamber, seated in rising tiers that stretched toward the dome's apex. Some beings floated in anti-gravity pods, their forms too delicate or gaseous for conventional seating. Others, massive and covered in chitinous plates or layered in thick fur, required reinforced platforms. A few, existing as pure energy, pulsed within containment fields, their sentient thoughts radiating in waves of color and sound. At the very bottom, in the lowest tier of the chamber, a single chair had been placed. It was unremarkable, made of steel, cushioned with synthetic fabric. Seated in it was the only human in the room. James Carter Thompson adjusted the cuffs of his suit, a tailored but simple navy blue ensemble. Compared to the gleaming exoskeletons, bioluminescent skins, and elaborate ceremonial robes worn by the Council's elite, he looked almost painfully ordinary. A whisper of soft laughter spread through the chamber as he took his seat, the amusement barely concealed by those around him. They did not need to speak to make their contempt known. The first speaker, an elder of the crystalline Zorvac species, stepped forward. His body shimmered with prismatic hues, a sign of amusement in his kind. "The human representative may take his seat," he announced, his voice carrying a gentle but unmistakable condescension. "We shall, of course, accommodate your species' physical limitations." More laughter rippled through the chamber. James had heard worse. He smiled, calmly, politely, and lowered himself into the chair. Around him, several alien dignitaries shifted subtly away, as though even proximity to a human might be contagious. The first speaker continued. "Now that our newest member has been seated, we shall address the primary issue before us, the Dark Swarm." At his words, a holographic display materialized above the chamber center. A 3-dimensional projection of the galactic map unfolded, showing hundreds of dark, shifting shapes moving toward the Council's core territories. The Dark Swarm, an enigmatic fleet of unknown origin, had been observed advancing from the outer sectors, their numbers growing with every report. Their technology was unknown, their motives unreadable. All attempts at communication had failed. The Council members murmured among themselves. Some spoke through vocal appendages, others through electronic pulses, pheromonal emissions, or even direct telepathic thoughtcasts. Finally, one of them spoke. Representative Mie of the Silicar Dominion, a towering cephalopod-like being, raised 2 of her 12 tentacles in mock inquiry. "Perhaps we should explain in simpler terms for our human friend," she mused, her voice a smooth, condescending hum. The laughter this time was not soft. James didn't react, not outwardly. He had been Earth's appointed representative for 3 years now. He knew how they saw him. A primitive creature from a primitive world, whose species had only just crawled out of its own solar system. To them, humanity was nothing more than a recently civilized predator. An upstart, a curiosity, barely worth consideration. He let them laugh. He let them mock. Then, when the amusement faded, he spoke. "That won't be necessary," he said evenly. "Earth's scientists have already analyzed the Dark Swarm's movement patterns. We have some thoughts to share, if the Council is willing to hear them." A silence settled over the chamber. Then a cold, pulsing glow radiated from third speaker Lux of the Vor Collective, a species of bioluminescent, coral-like entities. His voice was an eerie mix of resonance and static, an auditory representation of his kind's neural transmissions. "Thoughts," Lux repeated, his tone thick with amusement. "From a species that only achieved space travel a century ago." More murmurs, more barely concealed laughter. James expected it. But as he surveyed the chamber, he saw something else, something the others failed to notice. The younger representatives, particularly those from recently admitted species, were not laughing. They were watching, listening, curious. James saw it in their subtle body language. The slight forward leans, the tilted heads, the sharpened focus in their multiple eyes or visual receptors. They had yet to be fully indoctrinated into the idea of humanity's inferiority. And that was his opening. "We respect the Council's experience," James continued smoothly. "Earth has only recently joined the galactic community, and we understand our knowledge is limited. But perhaps that gives us a fresh perspective worth considering." A prismatic shimmer ran through first speaker Vox's crystalline body, a sign of irritation. "The Council has maintained galactic peace for 10,000 years, he stated. "We do not need perspective from a species that still burns fossil fuels on its colony worlds." James nodded, respectfully, but he did not back down. 10,000 years is impressive, he acknowledged. "Humanity has only known global peace for a few decades." He paused, ensuring every word landed. "But sometimes, those who have known war more recently have the most valuable insights about preventing it." A subtle shift rippled through the chamber. Representatives straightened. Conversations quieted. James had spent months studying council protocols and alien body language. He had practiced this moment 100 times. He knew the words would hit their mark. The council recognized Earth's right to speak, but only because the mandatory protocols forced them to. Still, he had done something more important. He had made them hesitate. He had planted the first seed of doubt. The first speaker sighed, his luminous body dimming slightly. "The council has already voted," he said. "Military action is required." James met his gaze. "Then one more perspective won't delay the decision, will it?" He stood, straightened his ordinary suit, and in a room full of beings who could reshape matter with a thought, he prepared to do something infinitely more powerful. He would make them think. Because for the first time in 10,000 years, they were about to hear something truly new. And that was the greatest weapon humanity had ever wielded. The war humanity chose not to fight. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council had never been this silent. James Carter Thompson, the lone human representative, stood at the center of the chamber, the holographic display of the dark swarm flickering in the air behind him. His words hung in the silence, challenging, defiant, but undeniably reasonable. In the thousands of years that the Galactic Council had ruled over countless worlds, they had never heard anything like it. For the first time, someone had dared to question their assumptions, to challenge the way they thought. And the worst part, they couldn't dismiss him. James could see it, in their shifting postures, in their wavering bioluminescent displays, in the hesitation that now crept into their voices. Even First Speaker Vox, the unshakable leader of the council, had dimmed ever so slightly. "And so," James continued, "the cost of war." James stepped forward, adjusting his simple blue suit, his movements calm but purposeful. "Before we commit to war," he began, his voice strong, "I want to share a story. A true story. One from Earth's history." He saw several representatives shift in their seats. Some rolled their eyes. Others muttered, clearly impatient. But James also saw something else. He saw curiosity. "And so," he pressed on, 200 years ago," James continued, "my world stood on the brink of destruction. Two of the most powerful nations in history, the United States and the Soviet Union, stood locked in what we call the Cold War." With emotion, he brought up a new holographic projection, a representation of Earth during the 20th century. The image shifted, revealing nuclear warheads, military standoffs, and the chilling reality of the era. They were armed with enough weapons to destroy the planet 100 times over, James said. And for decades, they stared each other down, waiting for one single misstep. One mistake that could have meant the end of everything. Silence. Even the representatives who had mocked him before were now listening. But something unexpected happened, James said. A choice was made, not out of fear, but out of understanding. The display changed. Now the image showed treaties being signed, leaders shaking hands, and the gradual de-escalation of the conflict. The Cold War didn't end because of war, James said. It ended because two sides who saw each other as enemies chose to talk instead of fight, to understand instead of destroy. He turned back to the assembly. What if the dark swarm is the same? The illusion of superiority. A deep hum filled the chamber as third speaker Lux flickered with irritation. This is a child's fantasy, human. Lux scoffed, his bioluminescent form shifting to a deep blue of annoyance. The dark swarm has given us no reason to believe they desire peace. They do not respond to diplomacy. They do not speak. They only advance. James nodded, expecting this argument. I understand why you think that, he admitted. But history tells us that just because someone doesn't communicate the way we expect, it doesn't mean they aren't trying. The chamber stirred, but James wasn't finished. For decades, humans believed that whales were nothing more than mindless animals, he said. We saw their sounds as random noise, their behavior as instinctual. He let the words hang for a moment. We were wrong. A new projection flashed to life, showing detailed sonograms of whale songs, patterns, languages, something that took humans centuries to even begin to understand. James looked up at the assembled leaders. You are all species that have achieved interstellar travel, he said. You pride yourselves on your wisdom, your intelligence, your experience. He let his gaze sweep across the room. So tell me, what if the dark swarm isn't attacking us? The silence that followed was different. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't dismissive. It was thoughtful. Even first speaker Vox, who had been so confident before, remained silent. James took a slow breath. The danger isn't just in what the dark swarm might be, he said. It's in what we assume they are. The seeds of doubt. Finally, a voice broke the silence. It was Representative Rex, the silver tree-like being who had been watching James the entire time. What do you propose? James saw his chance. He raised a hand, and the holographic display shifted. Instead of warships and battle formations, it now showed a single ship, unarmed, but with shields raised. A new kind of mission, James said. One that doesn't begin with weapons, but with communication. Murmurs filled the chamber. This is madness, Lux hissed. We are dealing with a force of unknown origin. If they are as powerful as we suspect, they could wipe us out regardless, James interrupted. Silence. He took a step forward. If we're wrong about them, James said, and we attack first, we might be starting a war that never needed to happen. His words echoed through the grand hall. And for the first time, the Galactic Council had no immediate answer. The moment everything changed, James knew he had done it. The shift had happened. Where before, the Council had seen him as an annoyance, a primitive, a child among titans. Now, they were listening, considering, doubting. And doubt, James knew, was the first step toward real change. The first speaker looked at him, his crystalline body shifting from irritation to something else, something closer to acknowledgement. Very well, Vox said. You will have one chance to prove your theory. James exhaled slowly, keeping his expression calm. But inside, he knew. This was the moment everything changed. Into the unknown. The decision had been made. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had voted against war. For the first time, instead of unleashing fleets of battleships, they had chosen a single vessel, a human vessel. It was unprecedented, unthinkable, and yet it was happening. The UNS Endeavour, the most advanced diplomatic ship Earth had ever built, was about to embark on the most dangerous first contact mission in history. Its task: to make contact with the dark swarm, a force so mysterious, so alien, that no one even knew if it was capable of communication. The Council had chosen diplomacy over war, but not all were convinced. Not all believed in this mission. and some were waiting for it to fail. Because if it did, there would be nothing left to stop the war from happening. Departure from the capital. James Carter Thompson stood on the observation deck of the UNS Endeavour, watching as the massive capital city of the Galactic Council's homeworld faded from view. The skylines of crystal and steel, the floating platforms, the endless streams of interstellar traffic, all of it shrinking as the ship ascended into space. A part of him still couldn't believe they had won the vote, that they were actually doing this. But now, as the ship left the planet's orbit, the weight of the mission settled heavily on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. The dark swarm was out there, waiting, and humanity was going to meet them face to face. James turned as the ship's captain approached. Commander Elena Vasquez, a veteran of Earth's diplomatic corps, her presence exuding both authority and calmness. "The crew is ready," she said. "We depart in 5 minutes." James nodded. "Any word from the council?" he asked. Vasquez's mouth tightened. "First Speaker Vox sent a formal acknowledgement," she said. "But there's a lot of opposition." James exhaled. "I expected that." Vasquez studied him. "Do you really believe this will work?" she asked. James turned back toward the viewport, watching the stars stretch out before them. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I believe we have to try." Vasquez gave a small nod. "Then let's make history." Moments later, the UNS Endeavour's engines flared to life, and the ship jumped into the unknown, approaching the swarm. 3 days later, they arrived. The outer sectors of Council space were vast, mostly uncharted, a frontier between known civilizations and the endless abyss beyond. And at the very edge of it, the dark swarm. Hundreds of vessels, black as the void itself, moved in perfect formation, their patterns unnervingly precise. They did not drift like ordinary ships. They flowed like a singular entity, like a hive mind. James stood on the command deck, watching the live feed from their long-range sensors. The dark swarm was moving, slowly but deliberately, toward Council space. If this mission failed, the Council would see this movement as an invasion, and they would strike first. Vasquez folded her arms. "They know we're here," she said. James nodded. "Let's hope they care enough to listen." The first message. They sent the first transmission, a standard mathematical sequence, a method used in first contact scenarios to establish a baseline for universal communication. The dark swarm did not respond. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. James paced the deck. Nothing. No acknowledgement. No reply. Just the cold, endless silence of space. Finally, Vasquez spoke. "We have to assume they're ignoring us," she said, "or they don't understand." James clenched his jaw. Or worse, he thought. They don't care. He turned to the linguistics team, a group of experts in xenocommunication and cryptography. "Anything?" he asked. One of the specialists shook her head. "No recognizable patterns," she said. "But there's something strange." She tapped the holographic console, bringing up a visual representation of the dark swarm's movements. James frowned. "They're adjusting," she said. "Slightly. Subtle shifts in formation, right after we send our messages." James stared at the display. It wasn't a direct response, but it wasn't random either. "Could it be a form of non-verbal communication?" he asked. The specialist hesitated. "It's possible," she admitted. "But if it is, it's like nothing we've ever seen." James exhaled. "We need to try something else," he said. The gamble that changed everything. The UNS Endeavour was a diplomatic ship, but it was also equipped with one of Earth's greatest scientific achievements, an adaptive AI capable of processing alien languages in real time. They had programmed it with every known communication system in the galaxy. And now, James was about to push it beyond its limits. He turned to the communications officer. "Run the AI's full spectrum analysis," he ordered. matched their movements to every known linguistic structure: gestural, pictographic, symbolic. The officer hesitated. "That could take hours, maybe days," he said. James nodded. "We're not going anywhere." They initiated the process. And then they waited. Hours passed. James barely moved from his spot, watching the endless void, watching the dark swarm as they continued their silent, methodical movement. Then, something happened. A change. One of the swarm ships, one of the smaller vessels, at the very edge of their formation, broke away. It moved toward them. Slowly, cautiously, but deliberately. James felt his pulse spike. "They're responding," Vasquez murmured. James inhaled sharply. "We don't know that yet," he said. Then, the ship stopped, hovering at a precise distance. And without warning, it transmitted something. A signal. A burst of symbols, flashing too fast to comprehend. The communications team scrambled. The AI processed it, decoded it. And then, the translation appeared on the screen. James's breath caught, because it was only 3 words. But those 3 words would change everything. "We are lost." The bridge went silent. James stared at the words. Vasquez's hands tightened into fists. "What the hell does that mean?" she whispered. James didn't answer. He couldn't. Because, in that moment, he realized something terrifying. The dark swarm wasn't an invading force. They weren't trying to conquer or destroy. They were running from something else, something worse. And now, it was coming for all of them.